Welcome to this special episode of the Informing Choices mini-pod, produced in collaboration with One Day in 2050. Ecofascism, Leviathan or Lifejacket of Humankind is a multi-author book featuring 36 top futurist voices who have come together to explore our climate future beyond purely climate data through the lens of ecofascism. But what is ecofascism? Ecofascism is a political ideology that merges elements of environmentalism with authoritarianism or fascism. It often involves a belief that environmental problems are caused by overpopulation, immigration, industrialization, and that these issues can be addressed through restrictive policies and even violence against marginalized groups. Ecofascists may advocate for a return to a more natural state, often at the expense of individual freedoms and human rights. The premise for all the stories in the book is this. The year is 2050. Temperatures have risen by over 2 degrees Celsius. Global population has reached 9.8 billion. Pressure on natural systems is at its peak. A new global movement has arisen. A totalitarian system has been enforced based on the minimum climate footprint on every aspect of our society. Today, we welcome founder at iReGen Ltd Rhona Morell to talk about her chapter in the book. Rhona, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks, Steve. Thank you for having me.
So, your chapter concerns an eco-fascist party making a global system shift from capitalism to global equity through law enforcement. Take us briefly through your chapter. What story are you telling here?
Yeah, wow. You know what? When I first came along to get involved in this book, and there was lots of different topics, and I just thought this one was the one that resonated. And the story really is trying to tell, which is extremely challenging in 500 words, may I add. It's really sort of starting to explore and understand how I've moved, I guess, from climate change to systems change. And I think there's a lot of over focus on certain parts of our world's challenges, but not really enough on equality and some of the amazing solutions that we know are out there to provide the systems change that we need. And I think having worked in this space for many years now, I think that what the story does is bring to life some really quite big ideas that aren't my ideas. Listen, I've been inspired by lots of people. We might talk about that later. And I think it's just about putting them out there and kind of provoking or poking the bee, if you like, just to see what people think about it. You know, when we talk about, you know, a citizen salary, if we talk about women who are fundamentally domestic engineers and should they be paid a salary, and what about a pension provided for them for all the amazing women out there? How do we rebalance that, the wealth, that we all see the big stats, I guess, for who controls it, how it works, and how the systems, people say the systems aren't fit for purpose, but they're actually really fit for purpose, but just not a fair one. So the story looks at equality, I guess, essentially, and it looks at how do we address that across the globe, essentially. I really, frankly, don't care size, color, creed, religion, etc. Obviously, as we're recording this, there's a lot going on in the world. So how can this story create that global peace as well? I think there's a lot going on. There's a lot of people struggling with anxiety about the world. I've got kids, and so they see bits. So anyway, back over to you for any for questions.
No, I mean that's one of the things that particularly strikes me immediately is the kind of connectivity with all these other things. You know, and quite typically we see something around climate change. Now, I'm sure I said this in another episode as well. We see something about climate change and we start to think about all the usual things, you know, about extreme weather, increasing sea levels, melting glaciers, you know, all that kind of thing. But actually, the really important stuff is, so what's the human implications? And that's all about connectivity, isn't it? Everything is connected, not just nationally, regionally, but globally.
Yeah, and I think, look, if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, love them or hate them, they're an attempt to align and visually show the interconnectedness of, what we need to focus on, but equally, as we draw further away from nature, the impact of that. So we will always have deniers, lobbyists. Well, most of the population probably sit in the it's just too big for me to face. I'm
Yes.
just going to carry on with what I'm doing. And so I think interconnected is really important. And the challenge with that is that brings complexity. Complexity brings many loops for people to hide behind or cause an argument over. What I'm trying to show in the story is how that collective connectedness, if that makes sense,
Yes.
can really help not just people but the planet thrive and put back the wrongdoings that we know we've done, and essentially, when we hear a lot of media that you talked about earlier, we have to address the fact that it's 70% of it's owned by three major players. So we only get a one-worded version. We get certain words that are allowed to be used and repeated. When you start to scratch under the surface and you start to look at those kind of truths, slavery, colonization, all of those things really are kind of prime examples of that. You really then start to say, oh, okay. And you start to challenge actually what you thought was right or true. And so I think the story is trying to say, okay, if we were to readdress those things, how does that regen and rebalance kind of work?
Yeah, I really like that notion of using these stories and actually the whole book really
Yeah.
about creating challenge, to come up with some potential solutions. You mentioned earlier on about inspiration. Talk us through a little bit about what was your inspiration in writing this chapter.
Yeah, I think, look, I come from the corporate world. That was my background, but I'd always done philanthropic work. I was obsessed with travel and nature. I went around the world on my own. I'm obsessed with David Attenborough, little girl, watching, in front of the fire, watching him on TV, and it's always been in my DNA. And I guess then I took the big leap 7 years ago to go, enough's enough. I want to be on a different part of that trajectory. I love innovation. I love change management, and I love challenging the status quo. And this felt like the right place to be. So that was kind of the first inspiration. The second was the people that I've met on this journey in the last 7 years. And there are just so many amazing people trying to address this. And lots of people kind of my age who are going, wow, okay, I know now. So now I want to do better. And then I went through that whole phase of lots of books, Limits to Growth, How the World Really Works, Factfulness, Earth for All. So a lot of these ideas are in the story are taken from those inspirations, and some of my own around, in terms of the education and how we look at robotics and AI for the next generation. So there's a lot of stimulus kind of going on here. And I think credit to all those people who have paved the way long before me and have been shouting about how we can change. So there's just a little summary of some.
The thing that I
Okay.
particularly liked there was your kind of focus around change, because actually quite a lot's going to have to change. And
Mm.
actually, the opportunity for innovation in coming up with the solutions, not just to, the climate change itself, but also all these other kind of connected pieces as well. It really does feel like, both innovation and change go hand in hand towards some kind of solution to the implications for climate change. So after people have read your chapter, what do you want the readers to do? What do you want them to think about after they've read your chapter?
You know what? I really want them to be brave enough to do what I've done, and as a early adopter of kind of systems change, really challenge my own beliefs and actually thinking like, oh yeah, electric vehicles are amazing, but we actually don't need 8 billion cars on the road. We just need better, more efficient, and affordable public transport, and then so on and so forth. It's like allow yourself to go, okay, I love this, I hate this, have a conversation with your work colleagues. Change and innovation is really scary. I get it, but I want people just to really embrace it and apply the principle of what if. What if we sell the sizzle? What if we lived in a world with balance? What if I brought these ideas into the boardroom, into my workshops, into the hospital canteen, whatever it might be? Create those conversations and try and flip the narrative to that positive rather than the doom and gloom that ultimately we see. And I think because that just plays into kind of lobbying, denial, all of those elements, and just admit when you're wrong. So admit when you're wrong, embrace the story and all the other chapters. It's a real easy read. Like each one's about 500 words. So just take one as inspiration. And if you've got a sustainability team or a board, then please pop one of these stories in on a one slider and just see what the response is. I'd really just like to encourage people to create the dialogue, change the narrative, and just try and do something a little bit better. If it's creating a ripple, then that's great. If it's causing debate and an argument, I love a good debate.
Yeah.
So be it.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I like the idea of kind of encouraging people to have an open mind on how some of these things interconnect, and on, you know, bringing positive solutions to bear, perhaps through the application of positive futures, because, you know, typically I think almost enabled through the media. You know, whenever we think about futures and using foresight, it tends to be quite a downbeat, a dystopian view of the future. But actually, as you identified earlier on, with innovation and a positive view on change, there's an opportunity for us to be very positive about the future as well, isn't there?
Yeah, and if you look at the history of humankind, we have consistently traded and exchanged ideas, you know, one for another, whether that's a product or a service. We've done it for hundreds of thousands of years. We will continue to do it. So I think I certainly have come from a dystopian place where I've kind of gone, oh my God, what am I doing? And actually, you come through that hockey curve and you come back out, and I think, yeah, well, you know, why wouldn't we continue in that framework? And we're not going to get it all right, and there will be things that we get wrong, but that's okay. That's life.
What a wonderful way to end the podcast episode. Rhona, thank you so much for your time. Really looking forward to people giving us feedback on what all these chapters tell them about our future in reference to climate change. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me, Steve. It's been an absolute pleasure to be a part of this whole journey and to kudos to the guys up putting it all together. So thank you for having me.
And thank you everyone for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the other episodes of this series of podcasts on ecofascism. And you'll also be able to check out all our other episodes on the Informing Choices mini pod. Do let your friends and colleagues know all about the podcast, and we'll see you on another episode very soon.